on mute, so that we don't hear either dogs barking or keyboard typing or whatever else is going on over on the other side. If you could just please make sure you have your line muted. Also, a reminder, though it says on the agenda that we have a section at the end for public comments, I do want folks who are in the public to know that they are welcome to comment on any agenda items throughout the meeting. I think that public comment is more meaningful when people can comment in real time. So if you are a member of the public and you'd like to step up to the table and make a comment, then please do step up to the table and we'll make sure that we call on you please to make a comment. And we've got our recording going for this? Okay. And if anyone on the line has any technical difficulties, you can email Stephanie. Do you have your email? Do you have access to it?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You can email Stephanie Clark, and her email address is
stephanie.clark@oregon.gov.
And that's Stephanie with a PH, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do let us know if you're having any kind of technical difficulties. We have a sign-in sheet by the door. If folks could sign in, that would be very helpful. Also, there are a number of handouts here. Those are also available up on the FRAC website. I'm going to make a real effort for our forthcoming meetings to ensure that materials are up online ahead of time. So if you could aid me in that by, if you plan on adding an agenda item, if you have supporting materials, please get those to me about a week in advance so I can put them up online so the public can be properly informed. So that's about what I have by way of introduction, but I do want to announce that I have hired a deputy. I'm very excited to announce that Todd, who's grabbing his handouts right now, but he'll be back in a minute, I promise. No, Todd is actually the one who's responsible for there being coffee at this meeting, so already an MVP. So I'm excited to announce that Todd Albert has joined the Office of the Public Records Advocate as Deputy Public Records Advocate. He's previously served in Oregon state government and as a Senior Assistant Attorney General in the Trial Division of the Oregon Department of Justice, and as an Assistant Legal Counsel to the Oregon Judicial Department. Todd has also taught Indian law courses as a visiting professor in the Indian law program at Lewis and Clark Law School. Before moving to Oregon, Todd spent more than 11 years as a public defender at the Legal Aid Society in New York, representing indigent clients in all facets of criminal prosecution. Todd is a graduate of Brooklyn Law School and Boston University. And I'm thrilled to be joining you. Todd just arrived a few weeks ago, but he's already hit the ground running. He's dealing with some of the requests for assistance that we've been receiving. He's been helping me out at trainings, and he'll in fact be beginning to provide trainings in November. So, first off, I think we need to do an approval of the minutes, which Todd graciously put together for us.
Move to approve.
Do we have a second?
I have. I just wanted to raise one point.
Oh, of course.
That's in order right now. It would be helpful, I think, in the future that I think there was a pretty lengthy discussion about the staff fee proposal, and I think the notion of that agenda item in that meeting was to gather feedback from committee council members. And so I think when we have situations like that, if it's possible to represent some of that discussion in the minutes, that would be helpful for the record. I'm not saying I'm going to stand in the way of these minutes, but I think just as a calling to the chest.
Yeah, we can definitely endeavor to do that.
Do you want me to withdraw it, and we can seek to get the minutes updated and approve them at the next meeting?
I took note about what the comments were from the group to inform today's discussion. So I do have those in writing.
Yeah.
If you want to amend the minutes.
Yeah, if you want to send those to me, I'll amend the minutes. I can send them around in advance of our next meeting, and then we can approve them now.
Great, I appreciate that.
My motion then.
Okay. I don't want to create a huge amount of additional work, right? I recognize, there's an art to capturing the essence of the discussion. Some experience in that. So, but that I appreciate the consideration.
Great. So I will get the notes from Liz, and then I will update the minutes. minutes, and I will send them all around to you, and we can discuss them at our next meeting. And if others have any other revisions that they would like to see to the minutes, please do let me know. While I'm at it making edits, that would be a great time to make edits for each section. So as far as updates, I had been asked at the last meeting to provide a list of the requests for assistance that I have received.
Can we do a round of?
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. You're right. We need to go around the table and introduce who's here and who's on the phone. So let's go ahead and start with, we'll start with Todd.
Hi, Todd Albert, Deputy Public Representative.
Rob Levette, Legal Counsel, Association of Oregon Counties.
Mark Landauer, Special Districts Association, Oregon.
Stephanie Clark, Oregon State Archives.
Jessica Dyer, Oregon State Archives.
Tony Hernandez, member of the public.
Steve Sewell from the Oregonian and a member of Society of Professional Journalists.
Liz Craig with the Department of Administrative Services.
Mary Beth Herbert, State Archivist, representing Secretary of State.
And Ginger McCall, Public Records Advocate. I believe we have some folks on the phone as well.
Yeah, Michael Crone. I'm on the phone with the Office of the Attorney General. Sorry, I can't be there with you guys.
This is Sharon Khosravi, Staff Attorney with SEIU Local 503.
Others on the phone? I think we had about 4 people, right?
Be people listening in.
Do members of the public want to introduce themselves?
Ginger, if I may, Les Ruark, the infamous Les Ruark from out in the hinterlands of north central Oregon.
Thank you for joining us. All right, and we'll start over on the side of the room. Nick, I think you were going to start.
Oh, Nick Budnick, SPJ.
Sue Ryan, City Institute.
Buzz Dillon, Policy Analyst for Free Foundation.
Vicky Stonemacher, City of Salem. Amy Johnson, City of Salem.
Emily Madisar, Office of the Governor.
Will Tatum, dude.
All right, great. Thank you very much for the reminder about that. So updates from my office. I've been asked last time to provide a list of the requests for assistance that I received, and I did provide that to you. I have that up on the website as well. So you can peruse that and sort of see what kinds of requests for assistance we're receiving. You will notice, as I certainly did, that there was a real uptick in requests for assistance after the month of August, or during the month of August. I'm not sure why that is. I think maybe in July I was more active on Twitter. Also, there may have been, I think there was an article in the Bench Bulletin about our potential legislative proposals. So I think the word is starting to get out that the office exists, and we were receiving more requests for assistance. The kind of perennial issues that I'm seeing are issues related to fees, denials of fee reductions and fee waivers, people who feel that the hourly rates that they're being charged are excessive, or the number of hours they're being charged are excessive. A fair number of exemption-related issues, folks who didn't really understand what the exemption was, it was being applied, they wanted more information about it. Folks who just wanted information about exemptions, generally what exemption might apply to this particular material. So we did a fair amount of assistance on those issues. And then delay is another big issue. Pretty predictably, the 3 big issues are fees, delay, and exemption. So you can take a look at that. And it's a fair mix, I think, of localities versus state agencies. I am hearing of a lot of issues with the city of Portland in particular, and I am planning to respond to that by reaching out to the city of Portland this Thursday to conduct a training there. And I've done some outreach to government officials in Portland to try to address that. So I've also been picking up the number of trainings. And I took to heart the comment that I received last time that I should endeavor to do this as efficiently as possible, perhaps by appearing at conferences where groups of people are gathered together. So in light of that, I was at the Society of Professional Journalists conference last Saturday in Eugene. I also am planning on attending the School Public Relations Conference in Bend next week, OSBA in Portland, the Oregon County Councils Association, this is just in the next month. These are the places that I'm going to be. And I have further plans in January and a few others in December as well. And I did speak at the OAMR conference as well in Portland, in September. So I've been getting out and reaching slightly larger audiences. I did my first big public training in Milwaukee on Monday, and I think that went pretty well. We had about 15 or 16 members of the public who showed up. People were also watching. It was streamed on YouTube. And the great thing about that is I did a government training beforehand, and then I did the public training afterward, and both of those were recorded, and they're up on my website now. So they were streamed online, and I know we had some government folks who were watching online, and there were also some folks during the public session who were watching online. So I'm happy that those trainings were recorded, and now they can be memorialized on the website, as well as my slides.
With the training at the City of Portland, it being such a big government, how are you approaching that with different bureaus and?
I will be candid with you. In order to provide that training, I had to go through the city attorney's office. So they are coordinating that. I'm not sure how many government officials will be there or what offices specifically they'll be from. That training is tomorrow, so when I find out, what the list of attendees is, I can certainly let you know. And I'm also doing a public training in Portland next Monday. So I've asked people to register ahead of time. Right now, I think I have about 20 folks registered for the public Portland training. And for these trainings, we've been using government buildings. The Milwaukee's training was at Milwaukee City Hall. Portland will also be in a government building there. We're trying to keep costs down. Do others have thoughts or comments?
Great. How's the feedback been?
Really good, actually. I was worried that for my public presentation, it was going to be too dry and too long, but people seem to really like it. In that presentation, I covered both FOIA and the Oregon Public Records Law, because I want people to be able to distinguish between the two. I think that's an important distinction. And the feedback that I received was pretty much uniformly positive, so I was very happy with that. And from the government, I've been heartened by the fact, one of the points that I like to raise frequently in the training is that all public bodies are required to have a public records policy. Many don't have them publicly available on their website right now, but we're working on that. And I have received contacts from at least 2 folks who attended those trainings who were afterward going to put together a public records policy. So I thought that was pretty helpful.
Has the question of liability for proper disclosure come up, or is that something you discussed? And is there?
It was taken care of in the bill in 2017.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how aware everybody out there is in terms of.
I think I received one question that was sort of tangentially related to that. I'm trying to recall what the question was. I think it was related specifically to personal information, though, to like privacy information.
So it's somewhat limited.
Yeah.
The fix we have is really, it's not a global fix.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have heard concerns from some of our members that the fix we put in place is nice, but it really didn't cover it all. For what it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
So have your members, if I may follow up?
Would they like it completed?
Yeah.
Well, don't be surprised if you see an amendment to a bill that might be moving or not. From me.
That's the answer I was looking for.
So what are the holes in the law that folks have identified?
It's just the limited, I'll have to call it up here, just the limited nature of the exception and how it applies to only certain types of records and not everything. So it really just focused in on some of the things that we spend a lot of time reviewing and get nervous about, which is good. Because I think the purpose of that was to give people a comfort zone so they don't have to spend, well, so they don't have to be paranoid and spend a lot of time. But I think, I remember, changed all these statute numbers. I'm crazy.
Usually the actual.
Yeah.
The number
Yeah.
335 now, Rob.
What's that?
The number is 335 now, Rob.
Great, 192,335.
Yeah.
And it's a standalone little section, as I recall. Thanks for the tip, and it basically says, public body that acting in good faith discloses the public records response to requests for public records is not liable for any loss of damages based on disclosure unless the information is affirmatively prohibited by state law. Nothing in the subsection can create liability toward the public body or create a cause of action based on the discharge. Public body that discloses any information in response to written requests for records under 311 to 378 that is privileged is not waived. Okay, that's the waiver. So it's really sub 1. And I haven't thought about how we would make it more comprehensive. But I would do
What about federal law?
discloses.
If something is prohibited from disclosure under federal law.
The problem is, I think, the word prohibit. So that's where it gets a little bit sticky, because there are certain things we are just prohibited from releasing. And then there are discretionary calls where we have to do a balancing test. Personnel records are a big example where we're not prohibited by law from releasing personnel records, even disciplinary records. But there's an exemption that applies, and you have to do the balancing test. So what if we do the balancing test? We agree with, say, Steve, release all kinds of disciplinary records on an employee, and somebody later says, no, I don't think that test would have come out that way. You gave Steve way too much stuff. You gave him stuff that wasn't even relevant to the story that he was digging into, and now he's plastered all over everywhere, all of this information about discipline for this, and this, and now I'm sued by an employee or a former.
Hey, Rob. Michael Crone here, and I definitely don't want to say that I'm opposed to changing this language at all, but I think the way that it's written, the problem you just hypothesized does not arise. You can only be liable if there's actually a prohibition. The way it's written is that you're not liable unless the disclosure is affirmatively prohibited. And even then it goes on to say this statute is not creating liability. So I definitely, you know, if your clients are finding issues with the way this is written, I think those should be fixed, but I don't see how you could be liable in the circumstance you described, because as you point out, there is no prohibition, so you don't trigger that unless.
And I'll have to noodle on this some more, Michael, to figure out what exactly my clients are worried about, or, because quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, I threw this statute at him even before it became a number, and I said, hey, here's the deal. And I did get some pushback, but it's been a while, I have to go back and look to see what the scenarios were that people were worried about. Maybe I'll bounce them off you, Michael, and if you and I agree that this is really not an issue, then maybe we just make it go away.
Yeah, or if we can make the statute clearer, as Steve points out, its whole purpose is to help people feel comfortable. So if it's not doing that, I would like to improve it, actually. But I definitely don't want your clients thinking that this doesn't apply if there's just an exemption. It definitely applies if there isn't a prohibition. So.
And that's also a point that I can add to my training so that people are more informed about it. I didn't realize that was one of the newer portions of the law. So I'll make sure that I add that to the training so people are apprised.
Sorry about
no.
rabbit hole there, but
it's fine. You try to make lawyers comfortable with releasing documents, and they're going to pick it apart and see what happens.
I mean, it's evident that it's confusing, right, based on our discussion.
Yeah.
Oh, and this is useful feedback for me, because this lets me know that there's something additional that I need to add to my training, because I haven't been including that.
And
It's important.
And keep in mind, we still, in my opinion, in government attorney time, we're still in the dust settling period.
yeah.
There's a lot of people that still are getting up to speed on the new timeframes and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So knee-jerk reactions to new statutes may in fact be sometimes negative before people actually
Understand it.
understand and wait to dust. So.
And And I suspect that some of that dust will be settling too when the DOJ issues its new public records manual, which I think will be out early next year. I know they're working diligently on that. So aside from that, Steve, did you have another comment? Okay. I am still working on the research project for the Sunshine Committee. The Sunshine Committee, again, is the committee that is considering all of the exemptions. They have a 10-year timeline to do that. My office has volunteered to do a research project for that committee to then submit the report to them on, in particular, the privacy-related exemptions. So we're working on that. We've been somewhat hampered by the fact that it has been surprisingly difficult for us to get a Westlaw contract. That has been unexpectedly held up at OJD until, I think, Monday. I requested it in early August, so it took 2 months for me to get Westlaw. But we're working on that. We've been following up diligently. So hopefully we will have Westlaw sometime in the next week. Legislative proposals. I did take the proposals that we come up with in the last meeting. The draft that I sent you, there is one adjustment to that, and that's on the reporting requirements. We did also agree to collect information about fee waivers and reductions, and that will be in the final draft of this in the Legislative Counsel's office. The fees have been sent along to Legislative Counsel's office. The Secretary had endorsed them or adopted them in an announcement that he sent out to the public. I've also been, putting the information up about them on Twitter. I'm hoping to do an op-ed or two about them as well, to publicize these proposals. So just in summary, again, we'll be renewing the track, and we did put into that bill, we didn't explicitly discuss the staggering of terms, but we did include staggering of terms in that bill. So if folks have any objection to that, this was what we had agreed on in the last meeting, so we did take it to the Legislative Counsel's office. We're going to be exploring avenues, and I would love to have your feedback on this for publicizing these proposals and lobbying for them. So if folks have ideas about that, I would love to hear them.
If I recall correctly, Ginger, have you had your opportunity to reply back to Legislative Counsel to make any modifications to these drafts?
We did. We may still be able to make modifications, but I would have to ask them about it.
Well, the reason I ask is LC 592, if I recall correctly, we had a very pointed discussion about the relating clause and the fact that this relating clause is pretty wide open. I thought we had talked about relating to accountability for public records law compliance for state agencies. This relating clause is far broader than that and could result in potentially sweeping in other governmental bodies, and I would just like to remind everybody that the minutes that you have before you does include a discussion about the relating clause, and that it's my recollection that we all agreed that the relating clause should be limited to state agencies.
I recall that we did have a comment. Maybe you could come up to the table if you want. We did have a comment. We had a whole discussion about the relating clause. I don't think that we, to my recollection, had decided upon a particular fix to that. But if folks want to have a conversation about that now, we certainly can. I know we had discussed it, but I don't know that we had language that we were going to insert, because there was a conversation about whether or not the statute was already limited to state agencies. Is that correct? Others can please weigh in on this if you were here and you participated in that.
I don't recall a vote. I don't recall.
There was a discussion. Please look at the minutes.
There was a discussion, yeah. I agree.
Yeah, I don't recall us reaching any conclusion or consensus on that. I think I remember you raising the issue, but you had a concern, but I don't recall.
Well, I'll review the minutes again.
So is that something that we want to vote on and add? I'm certainly open to that. I can take it to the Legislative Council's office.
Mark, which LC are you talking?
592.
And what he's referencing in the minutes is,
After
in the
Bill
minutes, it's in the final page, Legislative Fixes for Public Records Advocate Office. I think that's it. Was that the comment that you were talking about?
Number 6. On page 7.
Yeah, that's right. Number 6, the discussion ensued by the council about ensuring that the relating clause of the bill was narrowly tailored, including a definition of state agency to protect the bill from unintended amendments. Also, that a second bill was required to continue the fact beyond its current sunset deadline in 2020.
So I think if the issue is,
if you were to add relating to state agency accountability for public records law compliance.
Yeah, I can definitely ask about that. It's my understanding that we can, that we submitted the draft, but we may still be able to slide something in right before the deadline to fix it. If this is something that we have consensus on.
I mean, I think if the thrust of this is that we want to make sure that this is the bill, and this is only the bill, and it's not something that gets, additional legislative proposals from this council are not forthcoming, and we want to prevent this bill from becoming a vehicle for other agendas outside of the council.
That's the purpose of that discussion, and that was the discussion that we had. Was that?
So, sorry.
Go ahead, Michael.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, Mark, but is the idea basically that you're nervous that it may be amended by legislators to encompass non-state agencies? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is the idea that the group should not only endorse the idea that state agencies should do this, but also endorse the idea that nobody else should be required to, even though we're not affirmatively proposing that they be required to, we should foreclose that?
I have little doubt that Mr. Budnick and his group of friends will be having that discussion, because we had a meeting during legislative days with a group of people discussing this very topic, among others.
So isn't the better
and Representative Power is going to be introducing a bill. My point was, a bill coming from the PRAC was to be limited to the state agencies, and I think that that's what was reflected in the comments during our meeting last time.
Yeah, I will say that it was my understanding that this was limited to state agencies. So my understanding was we didn't agree to particular language for the clause that we're talking about, but our understanding amongst ourselves was that this was a proposal that was in regards to just state agencies. That's my recollection. Yeah, and the discussion that we had was whether or not the language that already existed in the statute was sufficient to limit this to state agencies. So, but our understanding amongst ourselves, and certainly my understanding as an individual, was that this was limited to state agencies, with the potential that in the future it may apply to other bodies. We may change it so that it does apply, but for now we're starting off with state agencies.
I'll say I'm fine with that. I mean, that was the focus of the discussion, that was the intent. So I just want to make sure that we have the opportunity to further discuss it today.
So the proposal on the table is to change that first line under a bill for an act to relating to state agency accountability for public records law compliance. So, which is also, I will note, it also is in line with the summary, which says requires each state agency to report to the Attorney General. So this just mirrors that. So that is the proposal. If someone would like to move, then we can vote on it.
I would move.
And actually, let's take a moment to welcome Scott, who may also be interested in voting on this matter. So we'll pause for just a second.
Thank you. Sorry, Mike.
Mark, do you want to just summarize your thoughts, the conversation that you're having?
Yeah, so Scott, we're looking at two drafts that we discussed during our last PrAC meeting about bills being introduced by the PrAC. One is to extend the PrAC.
Right.
The other was to build in accountability and reporting for state agencies. You'll note if you take a look at LC 592, I'll let you get to the paperwork.
We apologize for putting you on the spot. We just figured you would be interested.
No, I apologize. I had an appointment with my kid this morning, so.
Kids come first.
Parenting is a verb. Parent is a verb.
So
I'm not sure I will learn.
if you take a look at LC 592, I raised a question about the relating clause. You may recall that I had requested that a bill that would require state agencies to report to the Attorney General about their number of requests they receive, their timeliness, so on and so forth. If you look, however, at the relating to clause on line 2, you'll note that the relating clause is pretty wide open. We had a discussion during the last meeting that it should be confined to state agencies. I've made a motion to modify the relating clause to state relating to state agency accountability for public records compliance.
I believe that reflects the conversation from last time. I also, I don't know that we can ask, we can request that
You can request it, it doesn't mean it has to happen.
You'll do what you
The plan for working on LCs from state agencies is November 4th. They can still be working on it. Generally, the process is you get your request in, they do one work on it. You can ask for changes, and they do one change. They can do additional changes if there is time. So I think that's where we're at right now. So there is a possibility of doing additional changes, as provided that LC has time to get back to it by November. I think it's November 4th when they're prohibited from working on them at that point.
That's on state agency bill.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a 2-word change, so it shouldn't take that much time, I would assume. But I'm happy to email as soon as we finish at this meeting, or even over the break, if we can get a vote right now, I will email Legislative Counsel's office and ask them to make the change.
So I would move. Okay, go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say that I am not opposed to limiting our request to state agencies, but I think the council asking for this particular change to tie the hands of legislators is not really a wise move on our part, so I'm planning to vote no.
I would tell you, respond to that by saying that legislators will have plenty of other vehicles to work with and still have priority bills at their disposal. But I understand what you're saying, Michael.
Okay, I don't want you to think that I'm advocating, Mark, that we should expand the requirement. I'm only voting, I like the requirement as it is. This is only a vote on the proposed change to the relating clause.
So I would move that the relating clause be modified as previously discussed.
So that it will read relating to state agency accountability for public records law compliance.
I'll second.
Magic words again, I apologize.
Any discussion?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
No.
Thank you.
All right, and I will take that to Legislative Council during the break. All right. Other feedback from anyone on any of these updates? Other general thoughts or what my office should be doing to be more effective or efficient? So last time we had a fairly extensive discussion of additional annual reporting requirements. Specifically, we discussed whether or not to require agencies to report on the fees they collected or the exemptions that they cited. The exemption language that we had was a complete list of all the statutes, regulations, or administrative rules that the agency relies upon to authorize the agency to withhold information and the number of occasions on which each statute was relied upon. So we had discussed that, but we hadn't come to a consensus. So I wanted to raise that possibility again, in case it's something that we could get introduced as an amendment or as part of this proposed legislation. This is probably going to be our last chance to discuss these things for this legislative session. So I wanted to make sure that we had a full discussion of that and made a decision amongst ourselves about if we wanted to proceed.
Just to clarify, so you're saying in addition to the requirements that are set out
Yeah.
in the bill?
Yeah, so that bill, and then there was one more that we had that was to require them to report the number of times that they granted or denied a fee reduction or fee waiver request. So it's the ones that are included in this bill, and then the fee waiver, fee reduction one. We agreed unanimously on all of those. So I'm asking, because we had discussion about several other potential reporting requirements last time, but we didn't reach consensus on them. Do we want to add something in relation to the total dollar value of fees collected or to the exemptions of it? Which were the two outstanding issues that we discussed extensively that last time that we didn't agree on.
I'm not sure what value those two would add. I think we talked a little bit about it last time, but I'm just thinking we have, there are quite a few reporting requirements in the bill. And I'll just say again, I think agencies are going to have a hard time meeting the requirements in this concept because of our lack of a good electronic solution. So I think the more we add on, the less I would trust the data. Okay.
Do others have thoughts on this? I know the discussion last time was fairly robust, so I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to comment.
I see value to it, but I also, it's a new requirement. We don't know how it's going to work out. And so I don't think the perfect or the better should be the enemy of the good. So, and also some of the people who had strong opinions on this couldn't be here today, so.
Yeah.
I think it's fine.
I think the more you add to it, the higher likelihood someone will tag it with a fiscal. And that create a whole new set of problems to getting the bill you want out. I think we're looking at a very rough budget year.
That's a really good point. Thank you for thinking of that. Cameron?
I just want to clarify, the bill is a requirement that the people would have to do. Senate Bill 106 that was passed in 2017 required agencies and public bodies to cooperate with the public records advocate. And so the list of 17 questions we have is what they have to do as part of that cooperation. It's not part of the draft LC 592 that we just voted on change.
That is correct. The survey questions are a separate issue, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later, but briefly, the statute requires that we, as a council, survey state agencies about their public records practices. So I put together a list of questions with the help of Todd. Thank you again, Todd. So we put together a list of questions that we would like to send out to agencies and to some other public bodies around the state. The statute says that we have to survey them. I fully anticipate that when we send these survey questions out, a lot of public bodies will not necessarily have the data this time around. But this is to inform them that going forward, we're going to be conducting a survey, but that is a separate thing from the requirements in the statute. So at any time, we can change those survey questions. We could ask 2 questions instead of 17, or ask 20 questions instead of 17. But this statute is meant to create an actual requirement, a legal requirement for those agencies that they respond on at least these, I think, 4 data points.
With the survey, though, they're not required to start collecting the data. With the bill that's proposed, they would have to collect that data if they are not. With the survey, if they say, yeah, we don't have it, and just say we don't have it, they can say that every year thereafter too. They're not required to develop systems to answer these questions like that.
Exactly, yeah, they are not required to have a system in place. We are required to ask them questions, but they are not necessarily required to have a system in place that will track the data.
Well, and does 106 require agencies to cooperate with you in all things, or I thought it was simply in the mediation process?
I'm very upset right now that I don't have my physical copy of the statute in front of me. Yeah, it's on my desk, it's highlighted.
Since 106 didn't envision this reporting mechanism, I would think
Yeah.
that it would not.
No, they did.
Well,
They did?
It's in 106.
Okay.
Reporting is in 106.
Oh, okay,
the survey requirement is it's under the PRAC provision,
okay.
not under my provision, it's under the PRAC. And it's listed under the responsibilities of the PRAC.
Okay.
I'll have the statute in just a second, so I can cite it. But the survey would be a wholly separate matter from the reporting requirements. So it seems that folks aren't necessarily wanting to take up additional reporting requirements at this time. That's the sense that I'm getting. Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. All right. All right, so section 10, duties of the Public Records Advisory Council. The Public Records Advisory Council, created under section 8 of this 2017 Act, shall periodically perform all of the following: survey state agency and other public body practices and procedures for receiving public records requests, identifying the existence of records responsive to the request, and gathering and disclosing responsive records, determining fee estimates and imposing or waiving fees under ORS 192-440, and determining and applying exemptions from required disclosure of public records. We also are required to examine practices similar to those described in paragraph A of this subsection in other jurisdictions, and identify inefficiencies and inconsistencies in applications of the public records law that impede transparency, et cetera, but those are the relevant survey provisions. So there's not really a requirement in here that agencies cooperate with us or have to provide this information. The purpose of the statute is to actually create that requirement.
There's actually a requirement to cooperate, but not a requirement to develop systems.
Yeah, there's a survey.
And do you imagine this then going to more than state agencies?
I'd like to send it out to some of the larger municipalities and even some of the smaller ones. I mean, they're not mandated to have this collection of data, but I think that if we could get some data from them, even a few answers to a few of the questions. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the survey.
I don't think we're going to need to lean on our authority here, Ginger, but in section 8, the law does require state agencies and other public bodies to furnish us with such information as we consider necessary to perform our duties. So I think if I thought you were going to have to fight with state agencies over this, which I pretty much can guarantee you're not, I think we could do that.
And I think that's a useful provision to just cite in the introduction or cover letter to this survey, which I intend to draft up before we send this out to the agency. It's just a cover letter explaining the purposes of the survey, our authority for issuing it, and why they should be responding.
I think people might have forgotten about that, this part.
Yeah. So annual reporting requirements. It seems like the consensus is that we should wait before we add more. Folks agree? Okay.
I think Scott's point is really well founded.
All right, great. So with that, we have checked off our first two agenda items, and we're actually running well ahead of time. So we will take a brief break. It is 1:48 right now. Let's plan to come back at 2 o'clock.
go and send that email.
Yeah.
Sorry, we should definitely go. So each bill gets reviewed by a solicitor at this law. That is your fault. It's the beginning of the session. I wasn't sure if you were. And Brad, you can
And obviously, those are edit, I would just want more than. Yeah.
You know, I was having that conversation with the members.
Done.
I like writing myself. Yeah, I don't know how to figure it out like that. So that we don't have to.
Your function is not one thing.
You all right? Now, Liz, you're listening there, did you have a? Oh, that's right, that's right.
Really, really not.
At least you could have done it somehow from here.
Cool.
Walk on the beach, run amok.
Yeah. You should have said, you got hit by a rolling log or something.
I went to hop over down in Van, and I went to hop over this little creek on the beach,
Oh, I think actually.
down in this spray of sand and profanity, and cracked the tibia, partially tore the MCL, completely severed the ACL.
God!
I got to the, fortunately it was abandoned because there's a Rite Aid there, it's big enough, and so they got to the counter with a can of Underwood wine, a bottle of Motrin, an ice pack, and a brace, and the clerk just looked at me and said, "You all right?"
No.
What do you think? So, it's all getting,
Did you get, you're gonna get it fixed or?
yeah, I'm getting it all. I can't do my job without, I'm not gonna spend all this time on the marble floors without an ACL. That's a ticket to arthritis and falling and.
Well, I don't have one anymore.
Oh.
I have two babies, so.
Oh, okay.
So they you don't have.
Really?
Yeah, they take all your ligaments and turn on.
Huh.
And then you just between gravity and the muscles in your upper leg and lower leg. Basically, keep you together.
Well, two of you,
You'll miss your knees when they're gone.
Yeah, you believe me, if you got to the point I couldn't even walk the dog, like, around the block without my knees falling out. And it was like, I'm not living like this anymore.
Yeah.
And so, 5 months after I had the second one done, I did Portland to Coast, the walking road.
Yeah.
And walked 12 miles and didn't have a lick of pain, no swelling. Worst blisters in my life, but,
Right.
and I've not had any issues since. I mean, walked the golf course and, so it was the best thing I ever did.
Yeah,
So yeah, get it fixed, because you don't want all that other crap.
yeah. The evil of it, I was actually mountain biking in Alaska the week before, and, no problems, everything's fine, really, you walk on the beach and then you're in an MRI,
Mm-hmm.
like, funny.
Mm-hmm.
So did you guys resolve my executive session issue, or?
Oh, declining media?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we disposed of that.
Oh, good. I don't even need to be here.
No, I was gonna ask you about that. Okay, I'll go back and.
We're waiting for your draft.
No, I thought I had done it.
Oh, okay. I only have the memo, so it was sent out, so.
Yeah.
It just codifies the ONCA.
So I made the, I wanted to make sure.
Template language or whatever.
Yeah, and I looked at it.
Was that with,
Obviously I didn't. No, I was gonna remind you.
Gallagher and Bob Powell,
Oh, good.
and David Powell from Lake Oswego.
Okay. Yeah.
I was surprised when it talked about news media, it didn't say Richard Elmore.
Excluding.
Everyone's.
Yeah, I've already gotten emails.
So if they didn't use your policy, they need to update their policy.
They joined us.
We had a number of agencies.
Or the variety.
They still need to update their policy, even if they. Yep. They have to.
Rather than people show up,
Maybe that one.
we had somebody
In 20
get press credentials from a blog who was friends with
The timeline.
The timeline.
a terminated employee. So it goes to the executive session, and
But
you know, it's sort of an agent to track the executive session, but press credentials.
I hated it when it was done. And, you know, I was trying to get it
You're
up,
also, you know.
so I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Make
there's a
it
thing.
more straightforward.
Yeah.
You can't use it in television, but you theoretically, you get to.
Like, someone.
It's sort of the people that we talked to, but we actually,
Well,
had a great assumption. After similar situation where somebody started a law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clarify.
mid-93.
That's why I.
Well, there's a mechanism for those folks.
Start a blog, like,
That's what we're trying, that's what we're trying to get at.
We went back and forth.
All I did was get something, you know, and then it's done.
Yeah, well, the next quarter, the DOJ but they directed, tell them, but it didn't, but the statute doesn't grant that's what we agreed to. They would have to work out areas and then create, but then you have to create sort of a method with that issue because
And then.
Sorry,
We're the only state in the union. Yeah, and nobody would.
That would, to me, that's one of the different. Just a first question, me look at it, I think they're gonna be required to fix it. Whatever we're on. That would be my topic.
No, it's pretty.
Yeah.
I think you contacted me before about. A bunch of us in this room. How do we not violate your immunity?
You want her to facilitate.
That would have been, right, or.
And that was, that was
Yeah, I mean, well, I think if you could put it.
Don't get it wrong. I know. You let me know. Talk about the law that one.
Well, shall not be.
And that, again, it's got the same issues here. Here, right. It does apply to all, where everyone, even if they don't have this party, it's still different needs, different thoughts. Three people here. But if they see those, I don't know how many problems you have. But if we negotiate the bill, again, don't get it. I know. I think you're okay. That's my opinion. I mean, I can't advise you. I know. I think as long as you get it.
I mean, yeah, it's like couching it as a reduction of.
Anywhere in those discussions, don't get it wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'll probably avoid it by keeping them like. Yeah.
I guess.
And all show up, a bunch of us show up to the hearing. It's already, it's already public meeting. But you're still not agenda, so.
I feel like.
Probably can't get a majority there at a public.
And I feel like we should add another caveat about.
That's the absolute maximum. That might be a point, even on the other side of it. Current power. If those show up on the agenda, I think, yeah, that would make a difference.
Yeah, I just think we're.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, probably, but I guess.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So we will go ahead and get started. We're running about half an hour ahead of time, which is great. If we get out of here early, that would be fantastic. In the future, I envision that these meetings will be closer to 2 hours instead of 3 hours. So let's go ahead and discuss the survey. As I had emailed you, there is that requirement in section 10 that we periodically perform a survey, and then we also have to submit a report to the governor no later than December 1st of each even-numbered year. And the report describes the findings of the council since the council's last report. So that's something that I would be working on. I don't know that we'll necessarily have a chance to have another meeting before that report needs to be submitted. So I guess it would also be helpful for me to have from you permission to go ahead and put that report together and submit it to the governor. So thoughts on the survey questions on how we should go about making sure that this report gets submitted to the governor by December 1st.
I think they're all questions that we would like the answers to. I think probably more realistic to cut it by about half.
That was gonna be my comment. I think there's too many. I don't know why we would want to go back to 2017. Benchmark, I think, would be 2018, because that's when this office started. And trying to go back to 2017, I'm sure most people aren't going to give you, an answer. So I think if we can eliminate to maybe 10 questions, no more than 10 questions, And then really, what is the information we really want to have, and what are we planning on doing with it? If we're just collecting information, then, people will get, I mean, when I did a survey of 17 questions, I basically don't pay much attention to them. I guess that would be my comment, is let's focus on what do we really want to know, and how can we make it so that it's 10 questions or less.
We can definitely cut it down. I think what would be most interesting to me in my office, because so many of the complaints that I'm hearing about are fees, exemptions, deadlines. Those are the three big things. So amount of fees collected, fee waivers and reductions, requests that were granted versus denied, exemptions applied, and meeting of deadline.
So which questions would those be?
Well, the name, job title, contact information of the person completing the survey. I think some of these questions we just have to ask. Like, these are not really negotiable. And also, those questions are very useful to me because I'm hoping, in the absence of agencies having a public records policy up online, to put some of that information up on my own website so that it's easier for people to know who they should be contacting in a given public body.
If you do this, like in a Survey Monkey or something like that, you can have your first page contain just who's completing the survey, and then who your public records person is, and what the URL link is, if it applies. And that takes care of your questions, so then you're...
Okay, so those first three can kind of be questions.
Right. And then my question about fees is, total fees collected, that doesn't tell us the story. What was the cost associated with? Because then you have a better measure. Total fees collected, I might collect $300 in fees, and it cost me $500 to produce the request, or I might have collected $300 worth of fees and it cost me 25 cents for the time to produce it. So I think you need to have a balancing act there.
So do you have a suggestion for language that we can add?
I would just say, what was the cost of fees collected, and how much did it cost to produce those requests?
So total cost of fulfilling public records requests.
So how much time are we going to be able to give agencies to answer these questions if we want this information to be included in a report that is submitted in like less than 2 months?
Couch it as a public records request.
So I mean, I think if you're asking the questions that we have now, as long as we make it clear that we're talking about the request that went to the person that is supposed to receive requests, all that information I think that we're currently asking for is information that they're likely to have on hand. Reconstructing and like doing a budget analysis of like the actual costs. I know the state, for example, adopted a fee schedule that is based on statewide average hourly compensation for employees. So like calculating what the actual cost of the time the person who actually responded to the request spent on it is going to be more complicated than I'm sure we can have every state agency answering in the kind of detail we would want on the time frame that we're looking at.
Yeah. So is there a way to preface this or in the cover letter to say to the agencies, this is the information that we're looking for from you right now. This is the information that we'll be including in surveys in the future. So you should perhaps think about collecting it.
Mm-hmm.
Or we could maybe ask about like total time spent without asking them to like get into costs, and then we can at least evaluate something based on that. I don't know.
Right. But that's only one of the costs. So, I mean, so you can do time, and when you're calculating cost, it's the time that was required to fulfill the request. But then there are other costs too. There's costs that people are charging for the supplies that are necessary to fulfill the request, that sort of thing. Putting it on a different format. There's a lot of other associated costs with fulfilling a request, and So I guess that would be, you know, I mean, people charge for certifying a request. There are agencies out there that charge to certify a request, that it's a certified copy. I know if you were asked this question of vital records, it probably doesn't take them 5 minutes to fulfill the request, but then they certify it, so they added an additional charge onto the fee. So unless we know what they're charging, what they typically are figuring into their cost, you're not gonna know. Just knowing how much they're collecting in fees doesn't give us a good picture. Knowing how much time they spend on it, that's only part of the equation. What else are they charging for?
Well, a great example is having an attorney review for
Every single request.
exemption. You can't charge for that review, but the entity certainly is incurring costs as a result of that review.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but the point I was trying to make is they're not going to have time to reconstruct this information in the, like, maybe 2 weeks we're going to be able to give them. Like, I just don't think we can responsibly ask them about costs.
My suggestion would be is that to think that we're gonna get this into a December report is, I think, really not doable. I think what you need to say in the December report is we've sent out our first survey, and as soon as we get the results back in, we'll have that. But agencies have to bill these people. So that's a billing question, and that should be not that difficult to respond to once they get their billing department involved in it. You know, they have to itemize what they're billing these people for. They should be itemizing what they're billing these people for.
There were some comments, amongst the public, so if you could just step up to the table, move closer so they can hear you on the phone. And introduce yourself too, please.
Cameron Miles, Legislative Council. For a lot of the requests, they're email requests, and so itemization would be, okay, IT spends an hour and a half getting emails at $35.72 an hour, and then they went to the agency, the person over that division who reviewed them at $24.16 an hour for 3.5 hours. So to reconstruct that for every request, I don't think it's possible. And for those agencies that have tried to do that in the past to calculate costs, it's nearly impossible, and they just basically don't do it for the most part. And so a lot of time gets just thrown out because they don't look at every step of the way and who spends. I mean, how much is the person making? They pulls out all the files and photocopies the pages or scans them. To ask agencies to collect that information. I mean, that's the whole reason we went to the tiered fee schedule, is so that you weren't trying to do that for individual requests. And I think that would be it would be a step backwards from the new policies that have been adopted.
This is Emily Madisar with the Governor's Office. I just want to sort of voice my hesitation and even asking public bodies to track this information in the future, the cost of fulfilling, because the Governor's Office hardly ever charges anyone for a request. And one of the benefits to me as I'm actually fulfilling the public records requests of waiving fees is that I don't then have to track how much time I'm spending fulfilling this request. And that, you know, doesn't, like, I don't even estimate fees for most requests. I just waive generally as a matter of practice. And it would be a burden on me to then nevertheless track all of the time that I'm spending and all of the costs associated with a request that I know I'm already waiving fees on. And I feel like that would discourage, if I'm tracking already, then maybe I'll charge. I mean, not me, but I'm nervous that it would be a burden on agencies and it might result in fewer fee waivers. I just really have a hesitation in requiring agencies to track the cost of fulfilling every single public records request.
Nick, and then I think Tony, did you have a comment?
Yeah, okay.
Actually, Tony, you can have your hand up first then.
I don't know. I was just gonna ask, like, if it's possible to, I understand the concern of not having the questions answered within the time frame, and since we're just gonna do this annually, to ask agencies whether or not they do charge, or not charge, if they analyze existing costs, and if they do if they can provide that information. If they don't, then that's just more information for us to consider the following year.
So if yes, then how much?
If yes, please share what you have available. If no, okay.
I think to Cameron's point, I don't think agencies are analyzing the cost. That was the purpose of going with the statewide standardized fee schedule, that you didn't have to, we're all using the same fee schedule for different types of work. You didn't have to go in, and you shouldn't be going in and charging, you know, whatever my hourly rate is to make copies. You know, so I don't think agencies would even be able to tell us what actual costs are.
And it's not something that in the future agencies could consider as they approach the next survey.
I think it's too much, but that's just.
And the other thing, just that I would point out is really if you wanna be really precise about what the costs are, it depends, I think, on like the marginal needs for employees, really, like because we have staffs, all of our agencies have staffs, and those people are collecting a salary, and what they do may change, but unless they're overtime eligible, which hopefully we're not spending a lot of OT eligible time on public records requests and paying overtime. But barring overtime, we're not really, like, I think if we know approximately how many FTE, which we're asking about separately, people are actually spending on this part of public service, then we'll have a general enough idea of the cost to know what kind of actual investment the public is making in this. And like to track it hourly, I mean, I'm not entirely sure it even makes a lot of sense really, because unless you had to hire another person as a result of those hours, you probably don't have a real cost.
Nick had a comment.
Thanks. Just for what it's worth, I thought that I don't have the documents that we were looking at last time, but it seemed like it was a much more limited set of questions, and I think I thought that the direction was to keep it as non-intrusive as possible to avoid the unintended consequence of causing a bunch of basically you're asking fees to start tallying up all this information. Well, once you're making them do all this work, then I mean, of course, they're going to, I think, feel more of a need to actually charge fees when, in some cases, the work and the burden that you're putting on these agencies is going to be as much as fulfilling a simple forwarding of an email. So my concern is unintended consequences, I think.
Point of clarification real quick. What we were talking about last time was the annual reporting requirements. The survey is a separate matter.
Okay. I still am concerned, thank you. I still am just concerned about causing a bunch of research and then essentially encouraging people to be nervous about this question coming around next time around. Now they have to start accounting for everything, and it's just.
Well, the one thing I would say is that simply asking for the amount of fees an agency charges provides you zero context. It really doesn't do anything for you. All it does is tell you how much that state agency received in revenue based on the charges they're allowed to do. It doesn't tell you the volume necessarily, the volume, the amount of work that was put in, so on and so forth. So I think simply asking the question of how much you've charged doesn't really give you any good information. You've got to have some type of context to it. And so I don't know what the purpose of asking how much you charge unless you have some kind of follow-up qualification. So I'm not opposed to asking these questions. I do think it would create a burden in this short period of time, but I don't know how you reconcile it without a follow-up, because just simply asking that question doesn't give you anything of much value that I can tell.
Well, it's not the only question that's going to be asked, though. Let me finish. If it's asked in addition to how many requests do you receive and how many requests do you fulfill, that gives you a sense of, you know, we have a high volume agency that's charging nothing, we have a high volume agency that's charging lots of money. I mean, that doesn't answer everything, but it does give you some context.
But, you know, the whole thing is, you know, fees is one of those things that you hear the biggest complaints about, but unless you actually ask the hard questions, it's all anecdotal evidence. You don't have any evidence that is it excessive or is it realistic? And how are people going out? Unless you want to, this first go round, basically say, how do you base your fees? What are your fees based on? And so that's really easy, because that should be a policy that they have in place. Is how are you charging people, and just stay away from how much you've collected, but how are you charging people? And then if their policy is that every request is reviewed by an attorney before they release it, well, there's part of your problem moving forward, you know? So those are things that we can address actually as a council. But if you ask how much money they're collecting in fees, people are going to go nuts, because they're going to see this exorbitant amount of money that people are getting in money. They don't have they don't take into consideration what goes into fulfilling that request.
I would agree with Steve that you are asking how many records, so there is perhaps a little context, but that's really a high level context.
Well, there's also the questions about how many employees are working on this and how much of their job do they spend doing it, which, again, I think that is, like, to the extent there's a cost, it's that, right? It's that you have employees, and I know there are some marginal costs in other cases, Mary Beth, like the cost of a CD or whatever, but the big cost here really is usually staff time, and we are asking about staff time. And we're asking at a high level, but I think it's still enough to me to correlate usefully to this question about what people are collecting.
Todd, have a comment?
Yeah, I think some of the information we're seeking to collect will address these concerns and make it possible to receive the information we're looking for in the short run. The first is that we are asking for existing URLs to agency policies, which is a simple thing for them to provide, and leaves it up to the PRAC or our office to then go through those policies to determine how they're arriving at the cost they're charging. Also, in addition to asking how much agency actually collected, we are asking as well, how much did you initially request to fill a public records request, which then might be, and most likely will be, a larger number than the actual number of what the agency collected, which would demonstrate, at least in the instances when the agency gave an initial estimate, what they thought their costs were to fulfill the requirement based on their policy, which would include copying, staff time, and everything like that. The additional benefit of having those two numbers to compare, the initial estimate and the final cost, can help us understand where and when agencies are starting to do fee waivers and reductions. If there's an initial cost and a final cost and they're different, and the final cost is less, and hopefully that means some sort of consideration or negotiation went on between the requester and the agency to arrive at the final number. And although I doubt every single agency and every single request will have an initial formal amount, for the ones that do, at least that data is partially tracked and gives a place to start. And in the interim for this short reporting year, those numbers should already exist to the extent that they do. It gives us a place to start without requiring extra work of the agency.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Todd, that the questions about how much you estimated and how much you collected are not going to necessarily tell you much at all, because I expect that a large part of the discrepancy is actually going to be people abandoned their requests because they didn't want to pay the fee.
Steve?
Let me suggest one way forward. There was a lot of discussion and consensus around what went into the reporting bill. And we start with those three. Those are three numbers questions, I believe.
Three numbers questions, yes. I think, and also perhaps the first three questions on the survey would also be necessary information in addition to that.
Right, that, like who filled it out and those details. But, and then, so if we can agree on those three to go in this survey.
It's four, because remember, there's the fee waiver reduction one that should be in there, that's being added.
Oh, I thought we decided not to.
No, the fee waiver reduction, we unanimously agreed.
Okay.
Number of fee waivers reductions, we agreed to that.
Okay.
There are four.
Okay, so those four questions that we've agreed to, can we agree to those going in this survey for this year? and then go from there. Are there other softballs we could throw in, some yes or no questions as opposed to quantification questions?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Scott, I think you have a number of those.
However we decide this, I think a window or an opportunity for the agency to provide some commentary on the nature of requests, such as Division of State Lands, LCDC, are going to get requests for commercial entities doing due diligence on property acquisition. So those are usually paper requests. Most of those requests aren't digitized, or land use maps, things going back 30 years. The private industry making for-profit decisions, that's different in my mind than a news media organization or a private citizen requesting some other form of document. And so allowing the agency to explain that in their survey report, I think would be helpful.
You mean what is the predominant?
You could get an $8,000 request and not give any waivers, but that's a developer constantly doing business, looking for, trying to get financing from the bank, doing their due diligence.
So could you get at that with a question like, where do most of your requests come from? Fill in the blank.
Yeah.
You could. We usually don't ask people why they want information, but
what type of requester, what type of entity is requesting most of your?
Yeah, you could. So you might know if it's a developer, you'll know when they write the check or something along those lines, or where you invoice. But just give the agency some opportunity to provide some context and commentary.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, to include like a box where they can answer just long form, additional comments, context.
Yeah.
Okay, so I like Steve's proposal. I think that really simplifies things. The 4 data points that we've already agreed to, which are number of requests received, number of requests processed within the 15 business day deadline, number of requests processed within 60 days, and then number of fee waiver and reduction requests granted and denied. Those are the 4 data points.
And at the very best point, this would be for 2018 only.
For 2018 only. And I think also those first 3 questions are just necessary survey questions. Who's answering, who within your agency is responsible for public records requests, and then that URL to that publicly posted public records policy, that question serves 2 purposes. First, to get that information for me so I can then post it up on my website for the public to be able to know more easily where they can submit a request. But also, if the agency doesn't have that policy, that question is informing them that they are legally required to have one.
Can I?
And we can, just one real quick, we can put an asterisk on that too that says, if you do not have a public records policy, please contact the Office of the Public Records Advocate. We would be happy to work with you to craft one.
Can you repeat question 4?
Question 4.
The number of fee waiver requested, how many granted and denied.
Yeah. And we did agree unanimously on that last.
No, that's fine. I was just thinking, it seems like, and I don't know if this makes sense, but it seems like some of the concerns that I've heard around this table have to do with agencies perhaps overcharging. And I know, to Emily's point, I hardly ever charge agency, or I hardly ever charge for public records requests. I'm wondering if you also want to capture not just reduction and waiver requests that were granted, but ones that were just proactively done. Does that make sense?
The ones that you did,
I could have got 100 records requests last year and never charged one, and then I could have another agency who got 100 records requests last year and charged for every single one.
Yeah.
And then you could maybe perhaps do some follow-up to see, well, what's going on? What's the discrepancies in these practices? Or is this agency over here that's always charging, are they getting requests from largely commercial requesters?
But that's why I think the fee bill. Well, that's why the fee billings question could start to get at that, because if you have 0 fees and you fulfill lots of requests, then that tells us something.
That's true.
It'll just be inherent in the data.
But we can't seem to agree on what we should do about the fees. Yeah, sorry. So,
Just a simple yes or no question. Do
true. So just as a practical matter, we have this December 1st deadline for reports. It was raised by someone, though I don't recall who, that we perhaps don't have to have the survey, by Mary Beth, that we perhaps don't have to have the survey by December 1st for that report. We can say, here are the questions we've agreed on, we're submitting a survey out to agencies, this is the data we're collecting. How do folks feel about that? And then my follow-up question is, how would you like me to proceed? Because I do need to draft up that report, so what should we include in that report? How much review over that report do you want to have? Do you want to have an additional 1-hour telephonic meeting before I submit that so you can approve it? What would you like to do moving forward on that?
Can I ask a question before we address your questions? And that is, the survey, who is the target audience? Are we talking just state agencies, or are we going to also go to the next level of local governments, and to what extent? Because I think that the answer to that will potentially guide our response to your question.
So under the statute, we are supposed to survey state agency and other public body practices and procedures for.
Okay, so that would mean that we're going to go beyond just state agencies.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think under the statute, that's sort of what it's required of us. It doesn't specify which entities beyond state agencies, but it does say and other public bodies.
Well, I'm of the opinion that unless we have a product that we are all 100% comfortable with on December 1st, that perhaps Mary Beth has a good suggestion.
Which is to?
Just to report that we've got a survey out, here are the questions, here's the target audience, and we'll report the results when we've compiled the data and the CRAC is comfortable releasing the information.
Okay. Yeah.
And I would add to what Mark just said. I don't actually think the report necessarily has to be a report about a survey, right? This is a report that is about our findings and our recommendations, and we've already agreed on 2 legislative concepts. So I think those are things that a report could highlight, which is just to say, I don't think our report on December 1st, simply because it isn't going to have the survey information in it, will have to be a complete nothing of a report. I think we do have some things we can include in the report, and I would suggest that we either have another meeting of the committee prior to the December 1st date on which you submitted, or maybe create some kind of a subcommittee that could at least be delegated the authority to review and approve it. It is supposed to be a report from this group and not just from you as the public records advocate. So to my mind, I think it makes sense for us, or at least a subcommittee of us, to have approved it if that's possible.
Yeah, I agree. And my proposal would be that be a telephonic meeting and that it be as short as possible, because we're moving into the holidays. I know all of you are very busy, and we're moving into legislative session, so I want to be respectful of people's time.
I think the report also, one of the big reasons why, I'm here is because of the education component for the other governmental bodies. So I do think the report should also reflect all the various outreach things that you have done, and also, frankly, a compilation of the spreadsheet too, about, showing that you're out there doing stuff, this committee's been doing stuff, we're not sitting on our thumbs. Things are happening.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
It is our report, Michael. I also think, though, Ginger has a unique window, a much deeper vantage point than the rest of us, and I don't think you should shy from sort of drawing conclusions and observations about what the state of knowledge of public records law is in Oregon, and your experiences in terms of patterns and problems that requesters are facing, and frustrations that public bodies are facing, and synthesizing that. And just because it's not stuff that each of us has witnessed personally, maybe I think you should feel free to make those observations.
So it seems to me like going forward, what we want is for the report, doesn't have to contain the results of the survey. That's probably not realistic at this point. Does it make sense for me to go ahead and draft that report and send it out to you, and we'll have another meeting to discuss it, and I can hear your revisions for that report?
Yes.
Okay, so that's my first question. My second question is, do you think that we can agree in the next probably 10 to 15 minutes or so on what survey questions we should be asking, or should we table that till the next meeting? Because I'm hearing. Okay. Because I really liked, Steve, I thought your proposal was very good. So the 4 data points we already agreed on in our last meeting, plus those first 3 questions, which are basic information about who's completing the survey, who the public records officer is, and the URL for the public records policy.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do we want to do about those final 3 questions? So the 14 is, have members of your agency received training on public records requests during 2018, if so, unknown? How many lawsuits that include public records related claims have been filed against your agency?
What are you hoping to get out of that question?
I mean, the very piece of information contained in that question.
Well, I mean, there are agencies who have lawsuits filed against them all the time, and I don't know if it's really relevant. It's just because it happens. I think that one would have to be finessed a little bit more.
Okay, so we'll take that off the table for now if folks agree.
I just think that one needs to be fleshed out more.
Okay, and then there are the final 2, does your agency have a backlog of requests, how long or how many records? And how many full-time employees do you have devoted to the processing of public records requests? Approximately what percentage of each of these employees' time is spent processing public records requests? So do we want to include any of those questions along with those first 3 and the 4 points of data that we've already agreed on? Are there additional questions in that list or that other people have ideas on that we should be including?
I like the training question.
Okay, Tony, sorry.
If we're punting on the short deadline, to allow agencies to respond, I'd really like to have the question of yes or no, do you have some sort of cost, provision? I just, from what I've heard, and this is just me, a member of the public, I hear, a hesitation to ask this question because there might be a concern that public agencies that are providing fee waivers might then be inclined to charge the public in the future. And I understand that and respect that. But at the same time, as a member of the public, I want to know which agencies are giving away or are providing fee waivers. And I don't know if.
So that should be captured actually in those 4 questions that we already agreed on. See how many fee waivers and reductions have you granted?
Okay.
Or is that different?
Exactly. I guess what I'm trying to say
okay.
is I really agree with what you're saying, and I want to know who's undercharging and who's overbilling. And I think that's a big mission of what we're supposed to be doing, is to provide transparency, and we should be working towards that, regardless of the public's concerns for having more charges in the future, or vice versa. I think I personally would like to know which agencies are just work towards that goal in the future.
So that would you
So a yes or no
envision that?
question is perfectly fine. Like, I'm not asking or wanting to require agencies to do a bunch of analysis or work. I just want to know which one's tracking or not.
And you're saying tracking what their actual cost is,
Yes.
as opposed to the fees collected?
Yes.
So does that relate to the last question, Tony? The one about, does that relate maybe to the last question on the current list? How many employees are devoted to this process and what percentage of their time do they spend? Because to me, that to me is an important piece of data. Like, here's what you're charging and here's how much work you're actually putting into this process. I would like to know those 2 things for sure.
I mean, I guess I just don't know what the harm, I guess I'm struggling to figure out what the harm is. It's just a yes or no question. Do you track the costs associated with public records requests?
Okay, yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we should definitely do that. Do you track the cost?
Incurred to produce public records.
Okay.
So, do you mean that, can I ask a clarifying question? Is that meant in the context of, like, are you keeping a running tally, or just like when you get a request, Do you track the time of the person? Because I think our agency definitely keeps track of the time that we spend on a given public records request. In fact, I know we do that, but I don't know that we have like gone to the effort of actually adding those numbers together. So I wouldn't know whether to answer the question yes or no. So we should ask the question in a way that makes it clear which of those two things we're asking.
Okay, so how would you break that down? I mean, the other option is that we could just include a comment box, you know, please explain, and allow them to explain what their methods are.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea, actually. I like that a lot.
Okay.
Because then you can make it further surveys.
Okay. So right now, we have our 3 questions, introductory questions, that are the first 3 on the survey. We have the 4 data points we've already agreed on for the annual reporting. And we have, do you track the costs incurred in processing public records requests? Please explain. Do we want to include the question on training?
Yes.
Okay. So yes on training.
No harm in that.
All right.
Karen has just joined.
Oh, good, excellent. Do we want to include a question about backlogs or no?
I think that doesn't the 3 first questions get to that?
I think it does, yeah. Okay, so we cut that question. Do we want to include the question about percentage of that employee's time?
I do like that question. I think it would give us some good insight.
Okay. How do others feel about this?
That's one of my favorite questions. I like it.
My only concern is that, I mean, you could, but then we ask the other one about your fee and explain down at the bottom, does that lead to a separate one where you would include how many people answer those requests?
Yeah, that would be a follow-up question on the do you track costs incurred, right?
It could be, or it could be a separate survey where you just really get into fees. I mean, what do you do with an agency where everybody answers public records requests a quarter of their time? You know, it's like, I mean, I think you're going to get in, you're talking about tracking people's time and that sort of thing. You know, you have a staff of 52 and they all answer the public records request, but it's only a quarter of their time. What is that telling us? I mean, again, I like questions that is going to give us some hard, and what are we going to do with that data?
Okay. So we're not, comments on the public.
That, I mean, is super useful. You're going to know what agency, you know, agency X is using 12 employees. You can know on average, because they have to publish that information, how much those employees cost. And then you can compare them and know, oh, if we use a prac, we need to go talk to this agency. So instead of having all of the other agencies that are doing more or less okay burden, you can ask a fairly high-level question and figure out who your bad apples are, and then target them.
That doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad apple.
But it brings them up high enough for you to follow up without burdening everybody else who's clearly fine. It's a whole gradated information thing. Instead of going for all of the information, you take a little tiny bit.
You could have a really high-priced employee and they're the only ones doing it, and do they really need to be doing it? I mean, I guess there's ways that you can look at it. I don't necessarily, and dealing with agencies and how they handle that sort of thing, it's done a variety of ways. What's the most efficient way? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we don't have enough of data, and until we know, have more solid evidence instead of just anecdotal evidence. And I don't know if that question gets us there right yet. It may down the road, but it doesn't get us there right yet.
Well, the other thing I would sort of just point out to folks is that, you know, state agencies have effectively in-house counsel, okay? Most cities, well, some cities have in-house counsel. Some of my districts have in-house counsel. The majority of my members probably have attorneys in downtown Portland as their counsel because you can't afford to have an in-house counsel. And I can assure you that downtown law firm is going to be charging a very high amount to be doing this work versus maybe a city that has that in-house counsel or a state agency that has that counsel. So having these numbers may be helpful, but it also doesn't tell you the whole story, right? So I want to point that out. The other thing I want to point out amongst your questions, sorry, Ginger, I know you're looking at the clock, is that I've got 930 members. At least 300 of them have no internet presence whatsoever. So they're not going to be able to tell you what their URL because they have no presence, right? So I think that these questions are going to be helpful to a certain extent, but they're not getting to some of the root questions that we're really trying to drive at. I think that's just going to take time.
So to that final point, do you think it would be helpful if for question 3, we say, please provide a URL link or a copy of your publicly posted public records policy?
I think that that would probably be a good way to.
Mark, do you provide a model policy
Yes,
for
we
you as
do.
well?
In fact, I shared that with Nick not too long ago.
So I'm hearing, a fair amount of consensus on the first 3 questions, 4 data points we've already agreed to, the training question, which is number 14, and the new question, do you track the costs incurred in processing public records requests? Please explain. I'm not hearing consensus on the full-time employees question. So in the interest of time, do we want to move forward with just those questions that I listed there where we have consensus?
I'm going to just broach one last time question number 10, because the actual amount collected in fees, since there was some debate over that, but I'm not sure where we ended up. I think there was some belief that this would not be a hard number to come up with. It might not tell the full story, but it tells something. And the burden imposed on the public body might not be that great.
I like it, except I think we should make it clear that we're not asking anybody to do like a actual analysis, but just like based on their experience, what would they say are the 5? So that, you know, I think we can get the people who are dealing with public records to give us if we can get them to give us their sense of that, that will be accurate enough, and it's probably not going to improve the data significantly to suggest to them we're going to require them to go back and look at every response they gave to a public records request this year.
Well, I'm talking about the actual billings, the fees collected.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at 11. I retract everything I just said.
Talking about 10. And so here's the thought. Do we want to add to that the word approximate? What was the total approximate amount of fees?
Well, I would add to that, how many public records requests did you collect fees for in 17 or 18? And what was the total amount of fees collected? Because then you can see the ratio. You've got 2 public records requests and you charge 2,000, but then you've got another agency that.
You don't know what the request is, and that's my whole thing, is that when you look at stuff, it's not apples and apples, and that's why I think the fee thing needs to be saved for a separate survey, when we can get some information here and we can get a better idea what the policies are and do some looking at that and then move forward with the fee.
So here's the thought. Why don't we, in the future, in the next 6 months or so, make it a goal to do a separate survey that's just on fee-related issues? So for this one, we're getting this basic information, but that one is going to be a more in-depth look at fees in the state of Oregon.
I'm happy with that goal, Ginger. I will tell you that at least 5 members of your PrAC are going to be a little busy starting January 22nd.
I'll be a little busy starting January 24th.
Yes, you will. So I realize
So maybe we make it a longer timeline.
6 months is
Ambitious.
an aggressive timeline.
Okay, so in the near future, in the foreseeable future, we make it our goal to conduct a survey that is specifically focused on fee-related issues, where we've designed the questions to get at these more nuanced data points. Okay,
Sounds good.
so then, we have consensus, I believe. First 3 questions, 4 data points that we already agreed upon. Question number 14, which is the training question. And then our additional question, which is helpfully supplied by Tony, do you track the costs incurred in processing public records requests? Please explain. So do we want to go ahead and move forward on that?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Good, all right. So the next, and so we're also going to, we agreed we're going to do an additional short telephonic meeting just on the report. Once I have drafted up a report, I will send that along to you, and we will have a short telephonic meeting prior to my submission of that report with the governor. So the next item on our agenda is a follow-up on DAC fees. And I did want to, I know Nick is here, he wanted to make a comment on a fees-related issue, and he has to leave shortly, so I'm going to, if you all don't mind, give him an opportunity to speak, and then we can have additional follow-up on the fees policy.
Great, thanks. Just wanted to alert members of the council that Society of Professional Journalists is pursuing legislation, as Mark alluded to, on a related topic. Or at least we're discussing it with Representative Power, and that would be fee reform, similar to what Cameron described to you not too long ago, which essentially, in our view, would help both inform the public and cut through some of the bureaucracy that we're seeing in some localities, and also create a model of kind of constructive engagement by giving local governments a tool for incentivizing narrower requests by, as the Legislative Council has done, basically say you get a bigger fee waiver if you do a narrowly tailored request. So we think that approach has great potential to save both time and money for government, and fee waivers counterintuitively actually could save government a lot of time and money by incentivizing those much more narrowly tailored requests. So the details are not on paper anywhere, so it's not, I don't have a lot more to say about that particular issue. Another concept that we're discussing with the representative is essentially penalties for undue delay if there has been such a finding by an AG or a DA on appeal or by a court. And that would be sort of layered on top of the existing framework that was created by Senate Bill 481. And we are, again, still working on the language to ensure that we are not triggering any unintended consequences, and we've briefed the representative of local government and look forward to having a productive discussion with them. That's basically all I'm saying.
So Nick, were you hoping to have some feedback from folks now, or would you like folks to just individually reach out to you afterwards?
I would be interested in hearing if members of the PRAC have had time to even think about this or talk to their people, or have had any thoughts, or if there's if people want to hear more, have any questions, I'm here to talk about it.
So my one concern, you had mentioned what was the second proposal?
Penalties for.
Yeah, so my concern regarding the penalties is to ensure that any penalties don't come out of an agency's budget in such a way that it would just further strap the folks who are actually processing public records requests. Because if you're taking further resources away from those offices, that could have a backlash effect, that it makes it even harder for them to fulfill public records requests. So that, it will really depend on how that legislation is drafted.
Yeah, I think that I totally hear that concern. The concept is not that people are penalized for doing the best they can. It's for not fulfilling the intent of the law, in which case the budget, the law already reflects budgetary considerations and takes that into account with the safety valve that protects them from findings of undue delay. So that's sort of the baseline, is that they're not going to be penalized for lack of resources, because they're already protected under the safety valve.
How would that be different than the attorney's fees and costs provision? So under the law as it stands, if you take a lawsuit to court and you prevail, you can collect attorney's fees and costs, which, I mean, that Portland law, I think, was $200,000. So how would this be different from that penalty?
That's an excellent question. If a requester has a lawyer and doesn't like the outcome of a district attorney opinion or an AG opinion, they then can take it to court. And then if the litigation proceeds and the agency still is fighting them, then at the end there is a provision for attorney's fees. Unlike some states, there's not reimbursement for all the attorney's fees at all. Correct me if I'm wrong. So essentially, attorney's fees are available in very limited set of circumstances. What we are talking about is penalties and/or reimbursement for when a requester, a citizen, is forced to bear the cost of enforcing the law, of getting an agency to comply with a law which has been carefully crafted through a task force consensus model to protect all local agencies from essentially, I mean, there's no way that an agency that is at least making a good faith effort is going to be found in violation of this law, because there are no deadlines. It's not accurate to call it a law of deadlines. It's a law of timelines and benchmarks. So if, for instance, a requester has to invest hours and hours and hours to enforce the law, currently essentially the government has shifted the burden of compliance with the law from themselves to the requester. That seems to be an equity and justice issue that other states have already accounted for in the way they provide for penalties, fines, reimbursement of attorney's fees, which are handled in a much more aggressive way in other states. We're not saying we should go the way of Washington State. We're saying some very minor tweaks to add kind of the logical teeth and very minor teeth to this 481 framework that everyone has agreed to would assist in deterring agencies from ignoring the law, which in the experience of our members, a significant portion of them have ignored the law. So,
if I may, the example that you provided us, Nick, of the concussion requests, I still believe, quite honestly, that some of those requests were simply sent to the wrong people. So, we have a lot of discussion going forward on these proposals, and I'm happy to discuss them in the venue that Representative Power has created. I don't know if this is necessarily the best venue to hash out all the issues.
Scott, you have a comment?
Thank you. I too sat in on Representative Power's meeting, and this is an issue that will have that the majority or every member of the PRAC will be needing to discuss going forward. My concern at this point, now that it's been discussed in a public meeting and we're deliberating it, we've tripped some public meeting issues involving quorum and serial meetings, and I would request that we get some advice from the Department of Justice as to how we avoid creating personal liability for members of this commission as we continue to work this bill. I have obligations to my clients to advocate on their behalf on public records matters. I'm not horribly interested in exposing myself to personal liability for violating public meetings law by doing my job.
Well, this isn't a matter of the PRAC business, is it? I mean, it is as soon as we had this conversation. We hear information from a lot of outside bodies discussing their activities. I mean, I guess I just don't understand it.
I would like some advice from DOJ about whether or not we need to worry about a serial meeting.
I will leave that up to them.
This is not my intent.
I know it's not.
Cameron.
So as long as you don't put it on, as long as you're not deliberating to a final decision, I think we're okay. If this is brought up as the council's endorsing, that's when it would become an issue. If we're just being told, like it was pointed out, if we're just being told about it, then I think we're okay, because it's not a matter that we're just, again, discussing. We're not trying to get to a resolution of, it's not planned to be decided on by the committee. We're okay to, it's not going to violate the public meeting. But if we decide whether we want to endorse it, then it would trigger that.
That's not, we cannot have a discussion about endorsing it right now. I mean, I guess I don't see how this is different than the discussion of legislation regarding executive sessions that we'll be doing here. So, I mean, this is just Nick, he's bringing his proposal to us. If people want to have conversations with him in their individual capacity and whatever representation that they are for an agency or a public body or a group of public bodies, I think that's a conversation to have with Nick on the outside. But we as a committee, of course, can't take this up formally.
So it's my understanding from this conversation that it won't be appearing as a formal agenda item.
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, maybe at some point in the future, we'll be talking about fee-related legislation, but this is Nick's project. This is not my project or the FRAC's project.
SPJ, this is SPJ, this is, okay, not my project.
But I think the issue I raised is probably relevant to some of the other bills some of the committee bills, and so we may need to notice some public meetings ahead of hearings to avoid that problem.
So let's talk more about that after the meeting, the questions that you'd like me to ask DOJ.
Yeah, maybe Michael and I could chat too.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful. Let's have a conversation between at least the two of you or the three of us. So the DAS fee issue, we do have an update on that. We had extensive discussion about this last time. And we have an updated version of that which was distributed.
Yes, so it's on the table over here.
And is this available online?
No, it's not, but I can,
If you can send me the digital copy so I can put it up online, I would appreciate it.
Thank you for.
Do you want to stick around and comment on the fee policy since you were involved in that last time?
Yeah, I will.
So we talked about this, statewide policy on public records request fees and charges last time, and there were a lot of comments. And so I took that feedback and I've incorporated some changes into the draft, redlined. And without going through each one, there's kind of 4 main areas of edits. One is just general copy edits. Secondly, there are edits throughout where we try to make the language stronger and more explicit that this fee structure is a ceiling and represents the absolute maximum that an agency can charge. That agencies are always free to reduce or waive fees for any reason, and that under no circumstances are agencies permitted to use unnecessarily excessive costs to deter requesters or to block access to public records. The third category of changes were within the public interest threshold evaluation. So what we did was we added language around a presumption that requests from the media are in the public interest, and that agencies should either reduce or waive fees if requests are from the media and they're narrowly tailored. And then last, we made changes to the reduced fee schedule, which the draft I presented last time, or the policy I presented last time, represented a 20% reduction from the standard fee schedule, and we increased that to a 30% reduction in the reduced fee schedule. So those are the main categories of changes that you can see throughout the document. When we spoke last, I had talked about the fact that we have been intending to move this forward into official rulemaking, and that we wanted to do that this fall, and we're kind of in the fall now. And so I think that we are putting that off for a bit so we can have further discussion. And also, I was made aware of the pending legislation that's coming, so I don't know how that will bear on this, but I'm somewhat in a holding pattern right now. But would love to hear your thoughts on the changes that we've incorporated at this point.
I'll go first.
Sure.
I was Liz during the break. This is, I really appreciate all the changes that have been made there. It's a huge improvement over the previous version. I think really just sort of underscoring repeatedly the maximum, the fees should not be barriers, and the presumption of public interest for news media, as per FOIA, is an excellent change. One thing that we had talked about, I think that Cameron had talked about from Legislative Council, so I think that was part of the framework for this idea of partial reduction versus full reduction, depending on narrowness. I think, if I understand it correctly, Legislative Council grants an automatic 40% for news media, and it can go up to 100% if narrowness is demonstrated.
That's correct.
So I think the way it's worded now in the public interest test, in the DAS proposal, it says, if your news media then proceeds to the narrowness test. And I think certainly there would be precedent for saying there is no secondary test if your news media, proceed directly to go collect your $200. But the test for reasonableness applies to whether you get an additional fee waiver beyond the minimum.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is the way that it's written now is if a member of the media makes a request, then the agency automatically presumes that that request is in the public interest, and then goes to the reasonableness test. If it's narrowly tailored, narrowly structured, then the agency can either reduce or waive fees. That's the way this is written.
Right.
So it does, the way it's written does give agencies discretion over whether they're going to reduce or waive. I'm not opposed to what you said, which I think is, if it's a request from the member of media, you automatically get the reduced fee schedule, and then if it meets the reasonableness test, full waiver, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not opposed to that idea,
Great.
so I can take that back.
Okay.
Is that a comment?
Is there a definition for news media?
There's not. There's not a definition for news media.
Gotta have one.
However, we did talk about that last time, I think briefly, because I do think that it would be helpful to define that. Yeah.
Thoughts or comments?
Okay, I don't know if I'm not reading this right or not, but when you have your staff time, and then you have on, I think it would be the fourth page.
Yeah, sorry, the page numbers didn't work.
And then you have, is that under the reduced fee schedule then? This one here? That's your reduced fee
That's
schedule?
reduced fee.
Okay, then, that's okay, I get it. It just wasn't clear that was all under reduced fee. It almost looked like, I would be, almost, just for clarification, staff time under reduced fee schedule or something.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That sort of thing.
Thanks, yeah, I just wanted to thank the people at DAS for making some significant changes, and I feel like they've done so in a rather artful way that is very personally impresses me. I do appreciate that
the changes that you've made so far more closely reflect the intent of our public records law, which is to disclose records and to and sort of addresses the concern that escalating fees essentially amount to a denial, and can amount to a denial. You're sort of mirroring more closely the intent of the law. The one concern I have is that this was based on a statewide audit, which discovered hourly rates at a certain level, and the standardized rates that you're giving us a 30% reduction from are approximately double what the rates were in 2015, the hourly rates of labor that were being charged at that time. So I guess it's a question for me if the hourly rates that are going to be standardized by this are going to be double, then 30% presumption of 30% is not as great as it seems on the surface.
You're saying that even under the reduced fee schedule, you think that those hourly rates are double what they used to be?
No, I'm saying, no, I'm sorry. The standard rates are double what they used to be.
I don't think that's true, because when we came up with this fee schedule, we surveyed agencies to see what they were charging.
Okay.
And in most cases, these fees were less than what agencies were charging.
Okay.
And if agencies were charging less than what was in there, we made it very clear that we weren't expecting anyone to raise their fees to meet this. And that's why we added in a lot of language in here now about this is the absolute maximum. We don't expect people to raise fees. So I don't know, so I would say we have data that suggests that for most agencies that this is a lower charge than what they were charging before.
Well, in any event, we do appreciate the progress that you've made, and we are engaging with our members to talk about some of the details, and so we intend to stay engaged with the process, so thank you.
I just was going to follow up. I do think, in terms of the overall, the amount of the reduction, I appreciate the principle. I do think there is certainly precedent in Oregon for a 40% automatic in the Legislative Counsel's office. And the standard at the federal level is nearly 100%. It's a full waiver of all fees except for reproduction. And as others have pointed out, that is not bankrupting the federal government. So I think there would be plenty of room to look upward in the degree of automatic fee waiver. And I hope that will be considered in the process. I know that rulemaking has not been mapped out fully yet, but I just put that up there.
Okay. So it sounds like there's two main issues that I'm going to take back and talk with others about considering further changes to this, which is the fee reduction from 30% to 40%. And then if the request is from the media, the automatic reduction, whether that's 30 or 40. Mm-hmm. And then a full waiver if the request is narrowly tailored. All right, great.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is Scott's proposal, which I printed out, that he's the proposed draft legislation. If you don't have a little bit, there are copies. It's also available online on the PAC's website. So Scott had asked to discuss this with the group, again, as with what Nick had talked to us about, and also the DAS fee structure. This is not an official PRAC policy. This is something that he wants to get feedback from members on because we have related expertise.
Yeah, I didn't want to blindside anybody with anything going into session. I know nobody likes to get surprises in the bill stack, so I try to avoid that as a professional courtesy. So what this came about because of a few issues. Going back to about 2009, there was an incident in Lake Oswego. A blogger forms a blog. My understanding was the blog was specific, all it wrote about was the disposition of a specific piece of property that the city was trying to unload. It's now the bike rack headquarters soon, I think. At any rate, blogger wants to go to the executive session. The city attorney says, no, you're not media, kicks him out. City attorney ends up on Willamette Week's Rogue of the Week, back when they were doing that. So we sat down with Owen League, Lake Oswego, I believe SPJ was in the room, ONTA was, and sort of tried to talk out how to address this new form of media that wasn't envisioned in the statute. And so what we all agreed to was the cities, counties could adopt a ordinance that sort of outlined who the media were in their media markets, in their jurisdiction, and then described that they would be members, and said they would need to be members of ONTA or the Broadcasters Association. So essentially that there was some sort of recourse. So if somebody violated the prohibition on releasing information in a executive session that's prohibited in the statute, that the government would have someone to essentially to complain to. And so that, we think those are pretty sound policies. We think they're allowable under home rule. The challenge is the Ethics Commission doesn't. And my reading of the DOJ opinion on this matter says that they believe that Ethics Commission doesn't need to, or that the local policies that were agreed to don't hold water. So that's a challenge. That's kind of challenging for us. We think I think we're probably willing to litigate that. We prefer not to. Oregon is a home rule state. While the statute does say we have to allow media in, what it doesn't do is it doesn't prohibit or preempt a home rule entity. So all 241 cities and 9 of our counties from enacting their own definitions of what media is. And so there's this conflict in the statute. So what I've attempted to do here is codify in statute what that agreement between the League and ONTA was, with one addition, which is that news media is not an entity who is directly related to the subject the executive session is about or one of their agents. That was added in because the instance of that situation occurring is not 0. We had an incident, a smaller city, there's human resources beef going on. A blogger provides press credentials to 2 of the aggrieved employees' buddies to attend the executive session, essentially his agent acting to find out what was being discussed. That's not really what the statute would like to require. And so that's what this is the League's thinking. If we don't envision that anybody who's sitting at this table should have, or any member of the Broadcasters Association would even notice the statute was in effect. They should be fine. We're just asking that the people attending be members of an association with an ethics code, and that the reporters be a member of either SPJ or the Society for Investigative Journalists. I understand there's a couple of there's a lot of associations, some where there's an ethics code that they've agreed to abide by a certain professional level of conduct. So that's what we're trying to do. If I missed the mark, that wasn't my intent, but that's what we're thinking.
Can I ask a question? Scott, so number 4, it sounds like what you were saying is that number 4 is already the existing, that's the status quo? I mean,
according to us, it's the status quo. DOJ disagrees.
Oh, I see that.
Sorry, Michael.
Hi, Scott.
We believe that a reading of the Phoenix decision would lead a person to conclude, with my members doing one of Mark's, the Phoenix decision says that a legislature can't foreclose a constitutional protection. They can't foreclose home rule protection that my members enjoy for legislative intent. It has to be a clear, unambiguous preemption on our authority. So if you look at the liquor statute, it says that all of our ordinances conflicting with the statute of repeal. That doesn't exist in the meeting statute. It just says we have to allow media in without defining what media is. We believe that we can define, that the Constitution currently allows us that authority because the state didn't take it away.
Are there cities that have ordinances that further define news media?
Yes, and there are counties as well.
And they've been preempted by this decision, by the department?
No, they've been supported by that decision. So basically, as Scott mentioned, Phoenix pretty much solidifies their argument that unless the state explicitly prohibits them from doing something, they can do it. So in this case, because the statute says that you have to let media in, but it says nothing about what media is. Therefore, cities, home rule entities, including 9 of Rob's counties, can actually define what a member of the media is, because the state has not preempted them explicitly from doing so. I hope that explains it.
And do those cities that are currently, do they already have this provision that ties the ethical or membership to journalism organization, or is that what you're looking to now?
Yeah, that's what the local ordinance is, and I think actually the Columbia County ordinance is usually the one we use as a model on our website, but that's what we had agreed to with Bob.
Sorry, can I ask a question about this without litigating the issue with my friends from the cities and the special district? The point of the last paragraph seems to be the entire point of the measure, but I guess I'm a little bit confused what you're anticipating. It seems like the only possible use of that would be to allow cities to exclude people that the state statute would otherwise require them to allow. Is that right? Is that your goal?
Again, without litigating it, because I'm not a lawyer, I think what it does is it allows them to define who's in and who's in that market. So who are the people who are, so like in the coast, you would list out all of the radio stations that are providing and all of the newspapers. I'm open to additional changes on that, but that's it's meant as a guide so that the official would know, is this person media, or is this a person who's there for some other purpose than the public interest?
So if there's like a big statewide scandal in a small town, the community can still keep the Oregonian or KGW from attending executive session?
I hope I didn't write it that way. I haven't gotten it back from LC yet, but that's not the intent, is that if you're but there would be an ONPA member, so I think they would be in. That's why okay.
Yeah, I guess maybe, I don't actually know that I have any substantive problem with the way the definition reads in the first part. I haven't had time to think that through all the way. It seemed fairly close actually to what the definition was that the AG announced in the published opinion you're referring to. I just am trying to figure out like what is it cities want to be able to do that is separate from what the statute, not just cities, but like what is it you're trying to accomplish, and is it to allow additional people that wouldn't qualify in, or is it to keep people that...
There are people that are attending these things now who probably don't need to, and we know that there's been abuse of the statute, and so that's what we're trying to, that's what we're really getting at, is so that if you have somebody who's, theoretically, I could crash the Ethics Commission executive sessions, and I've been tempted, because I have a byline in the League's bulletin, and I write regularly when they have ethics bills. I usually write about them. I'm not sure that I should. And then we also see instances of people with vested interests in the outcome of issues under the guise of having a WordPress blog showing up.
All right. No, that part definitely makes sense to me, that if you're personally invested, you would want to be excluded. And I think actually current law is consistent with that too. Anyway, I definitely appreciate the heads up. I would encourage you to look at sort of the substantive definition such as it is that the AG's opinion settles on. I think it's maybe a little broader than the one you have in the first few paragraphs, but not a lot, if any at all. And then I think really I would hope you could answer the question of like, what is it that you want cities, counties, and local governments to be able to add to the state statute, and why should it differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction? Like, what sorts of things qualify you to attend the executive session? Those are just questions that I have.
Tony, I think you had a comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So my concern is, and maybe, I think I'm hearing it, and I think you answered the question, but I just want to make sure I understand it quickly. So, and I don't know if this was discussed at length at the last meeting, but has the consideration been of people practicing journalism instead of defining a journalist? So, and I say that because there's a lot of laid off journalists, right? And they're wanting to start their own business or start their own venture. So there may be one or two people, and they may not have the tenure of the Oregonian or the, Capital Press or a small, established daily newspaper. And so I don't want to prohibit that. And I think with the membership of some sort of professional organization showing that this person is supposed to be practicing some sort of ethical guidelines, could tie that in, but to bar someone who doesn't belong to a legacy media, for me is a little bit of an issue, just because I think everyone has the right to blog, or venture out to try something new. And even if they don't have the cred of a legacy newspaper, they should still have the same affordability to attend So I think
an offline conversation with you about how SBJ and the other associations deal with members that are in transition.
Yeah, so I used to be a national board member for SBJ, and there was a discussion for changing the name at one point to Society of Professional Journalism, opposed to Society of Professional Journalism. So that's kind of why it's going for. So I'd love to talk about it.
Thank you. So really, again, I don't want to blindside anybody with this. I know it's the sort of thing that people can get concerned about quickly. So I wanted to get an open conversation early on, let people know we're not hiding anything here. So.
All right. Further comments? Okay. All right. So we have time in the schedule for public comment. So we did invite the public to comment throughout. But if anyone has any additional comments in the public or here on the track. All right. So we are going to finish about a half an hour ahead of time. So I believe we probably need a motion to conclude, right? Oh, you know what? Before we do that, let me just summarize what we've done here. I've agreed that I'm going to update the minutes with more discussion of the fee discussion from last time, some more detail on that. On the legislative proposal, we agreed to add state agency in the relating to clause, and I did get a confirmation already from Legislative Counsel's office that they will be adding that. We agreed on survey questions, and we agreed to meet again before the report is submitted to the governor. That's due December 1st. To finalize that report, we will do that via telephonic meeting, and it will be brief, only associated with that report. In the meantime, I will draft up the report, and I will include information on the training, the request for assistance, and on our legislative proposals, as well as the fact that we've drafted survey questions and we intend to conduct a survey. One thing that we didn't do, I know, is we didn't decide who we wanted to send the survey out to. So, do we want to deal with that now, or maybe in that meeting where we talk about the report?
Perhaps you could make some recommendations at that time, who you could possibly send to. I'm more than happy to discuss with you if you're interested in surveying any of my members.
Okay, yeah, I'm interested in hearing from folks. I will put a list together and we will talk about that briefly at our pre-December 1st meeting. So that will be a shortened meeting, with a limited number of agenda items, and it will be telephonic, so people don't have to get here. So that is what I have as far as my action items and what was agreed to at this meeting. All right, so do we move to? All right, no discussion of that, I take it. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Who wants to stick around? There are snacks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Recording now goes on. But all those that watch that roll to make sure they. Into this topic.